The Shawnee had scouts tracking both armies from the time of their departure, knowing exactly their movements. In an effort to prevent their meeting, Chief Cornstalk decided to attack the Southern Army first. During the night of October 9th, about 500 Shawnee warriors crossed the Ohio River above the Kanawha, planning a surprise attack before the soldiers awoke. On sunrise early morning of October 10th, some militiamen left camp in search of fresh game to add up to their meat rations. 2 miles from Point Pleasant, they were surprised to discover Shawnee warriors scattered over a 5-acre field. The Shawnee shot and killed one of the soldiers, but the others managed to escape and sound the alarm in camp. Colonel Lewis immediately sent out 2 150-man contingents to drive back what he assumed was a large scouting party. Despite losing the element of surprise, Chief Cornstalk decided to attack, marking the start of the Battle of Point Pleasant. The battle that ensued would be intense and brutal, marking a pivotal moment in the conflict. To understand the significance of the Battle of Point Pleasant and what led to it, we need to go back to the 1700s. Since the early 1700s, British colonizers pushed westward into native lands. This whole century is marked by war and conflicts. The Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1768 extended the colonial boundary to the west, giving British colonists a claim to lands in what are now the states of West Virginia and Kentucky. The Shawnee did not participate in this treaty. It was negotiated between British officials and the Iroquois Confederacy. The Shawnee and other Native American tribes hunted there and shared this land. Tensions between British settlers and Native American tribes were escalating. The Ohio Valley, rich in resources and of strategic importance, became a hotbed of conflict. As settlers pushed westward, Native American tribes fought to defend their lands. Prominent Virginians, including George Washington, had financial interests in western lands. They sought to capitalize on land speculation opportunities, often at the expense of Native Americans. On the other side, Native Americans were determined to protect their homelands from being overrun by settlers, leading to frequent skirmishes and raids on frontier settlements. All this culminated in 1774. The Battle of Point Pleasant, fought in October, was preceded by a long spring and a summer of deadly violence between settlers, the Shawnee, and the Mingos. Planning to subdue the natives and expand west, Virginia Governor Lord Dunmore dispatched 2 armies to attack Shawnee villages north of the Ohio River. The first one, numbering 1,000 men, was commanded by Colonel Andrew Lewis. They marched southwest from Camp Union in present-day Lewisburg, West Virginia. The other, led by Lord Dunmore himself, numbering 1,700 men, advanced from Fort Pitt. Lewis's forces reached Point Pleasant at the mouth of the Kanawha River on October 6th. The Shawnee had scouts tracking both armies from the time of their departure, knowing exactly their movements. In an effort to prevent their meeting, Chief Cornstalk decided to attack the Southern Army first. During the night of October 9th, about 500 Shawnee warriors crossed the Ohio River above the Kanawha, planning a surprise attack before the soldiers awoke. On sunrise early morning of October 10th, some militiamen left camp in search of fresh game to add up to their meat rations. 2 miles from Point Pleasant, they were surprised to discover Shawnee warriors scattered over a 5-acre field. The Shawnee shot and killed one of the soldiers, but the others managed to escape and sound the alarm in camp. Colonel Lewis immediately sent out 2 150-man contingents to drive back what he assumed was a large scouting party. Despite losing the element of surprise, Chief Cornstalk decided to attack, marking the start of the Battle of Point Pleasant. The battle that ensued would be intense and brutal, marking a pivotal moment in the conflict. Despite losing the element of surprise, Chief Cornstalk decided to attack the 2 contingents since the militia was divided, and his braves collectively outnumbered them. As the militia advanced almost half a mile, around 6:30 a.m., the Shawnee ambushed the columns, inflicting heavy casualties on the front ranks. After the initial shock, the eastern militia column began to waver and fell back with the Shawnee pushing. At the same time, this gave the Shawnee a chance to concentrate their fire on the western militia column. After about 30 minutes of hearing steady gunshots, and with many wounded returning to the main camp, Colonel Lewis knew his army was in a full-scale engagement, one he had not expected at Point Pleasant. Chief Cornstalk caught him by surprise. Soon, Lewis sent the bulk of his army to the front. 200 colonial reinforcements rushed forward, stabilizing their line. The militia organized a continual line of defense that stretched from the Ohio on the left flank to the Kanawha on the right. Soon also individual soldiers from the encampment began to arrive and fill in the line wherever gaps existed. As the Shawnee continued pushing, each warrior and soldier found cover behind a rock, tree, or stump, and fought his individual war. In the heavy fog and thick hanging gun smoke, the Shawnee warriors pushed in close and a melee of hand-to-hand fighting ensued. Neither party could drive the other, and neither would retreat. Rifles and muskets were used as clubs, as were tomahawks, knives, hands, and feet. Chief Cornstalk's voice could be heard as he shouted, "Be strong! Be strong!" Taller than his warriors and easily recognizable, Cornstalk appeared everywhere, fighting bravely. The soldiers snapped shots at the Shawnee leader, but without success. The struggle continued hour after hour, with first one side rushing forward and then the other. Warriors shouted, "Why don't you whistle now?" mocking the fifes that called the militia companies to muster. With the militia's flanks to the rivers, the Shawnee couldn't execute their favored tactic of flanking the enemy and coming up the rear. Surprisingly to the soldiers, the warriors came on frontally in brave rushes led by their chiefs, Red Hawk, Blue Jacket, Black Hoof, Cornstalk, and his son. The river bottomland was filled with driftwood and rock outcroppings, and at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a push by the militia gained a long ridge with logs and rocks that offered excellent cover. Slowly, the Shawnee fell back to a second ridge that stretched from the Ohio to a swamp, and firing gradually slackened. As the ground fog lifted, the rifle fire of the militia became more effective because their long rifles were decidedly superior. The fierce hand-to-hand combat that characterized the morning fight could be sustained for only so long, and the afternoon's fighting slowed to long-range shooting. At this point, Cornstalk made the unusual decision, at least for an outnumbered native force. He decided to stand and fight, knowing that would mean significant casualties. The Shawnee chief reasoned that if he retreated and allowed Lewis and Dunmore to join up, the Shawnee would have no chance at defeating the two colonial armies together. Colonel Andrew Lewis, in late afternoon, decided to conduct a maneuver hoping that could turn the battle in his favor. Lewis ordered 3 companies find a way to flank the Shawnee line. The officers withdrew their men from the colonial line and led them on a circular route up the Kanawha under cover of the riverbank. Turning up Crooked Creek, they emerged from the stream on a slight ridge in the Shawnee's left rear and opened fire. This sudden assault shocked the warriors. Cornstalk was well aware from active scouts that a second column was moving toward Point Pleasant. This flanking force was probably mistaken for that column, and Cornstalk began to withdraw his warriors. He selected the best of his men to remain and continue the fight until all Shawnee wounded were carried across the Ohio. His brother, Silverheels, was wounded seriously and was carried back across the Ohio by their sister, Nonhelema. Most of the Shawnee dead were committed to the river, and skillfully the Shawnee chief withdrew, retreating back into the forest across the Ohio. When Lord Dunmore actually arrived at about midnight, he found the colonial camp in chaos. The wounded were suffering horribly, with only minimal medical assistance available. Many officers were killed or wounded. While Colonel Lewis held the field, his losses were significant, with 75 killed and 140 wounded, resulting nearly a quarter of his army killed or wounded. Shawnee losses were difficult to determine as they usually carried off their dead and wounded, but it is estimated they suffered around 50 casualties. Among those killed was Puckshinwa, the father of Tecumseh. 1 week after the fight at Point Pleasant, Colonel Lewis, with his unit rested and recovered, crossed the Ohio River and moved north to rendezvous with Lord Dunmore at Camp Charlotte, a fortified camp near the main Shawnee towns on the Scioto River. Even if Cornstalk wanted to continue the fight, the prospect of facing the combined armies was too much for the other Shawnee chiefs who sued for peace, signing the Treaty of Camp Charlotte in late October. Cornstalk promised to surrender all white prisoners held by the assorted tribes and vowed that the natives would stop hunting south of the Ohio or harassing boats on the river. Dunmore followed with a promise that no more whites would enter Kentucky and that no settler should set foot north of the Ohio River. With peace concluded, Even though most knew it would not last, the Virginia militiamen headed for home, and natives returned to their villages.